Hey there, it's Nathaniel Grim. Welcome to my astrology podcast, Astrology Unbound. Each week, we cover an array of current events, transits, educational material, and much more. Very excited today to talk about not only a preview of the week ahead, but also to go through the Zodiac signs, the 12 signs, and share with you the evolutionary stages of each sign, the evolved and the unevolved versions of them. So before I begin, I would invite you to subscribe to my newsletter, my Substack. That's where I go even deeper into the transits that are coming up, and that includes things like journal prompts for the new and full moons so that you're really timing your intentions with the lunation cycle and really manifesting in accordance with your placements in your chart. I also offer one-on-one readings, and I have courses available as well on my website. And my website is evannathanielgrim.com. That's where you can also find my other channels like my YouTube, my TikTok, my Instagram, and so on. So thank you for tuning in. So in the upcoming week, the week of June 10th, we do have some energy really building from that Gemini new moon on June 6th. And so we continue to have Venus, Mercury, the Sun, all in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini. And what's really happening this week, some of the defining transits are these squares that are forming between Venus and Mercury and the Sun in Gemini to Saturn and eventually Neptune in Pisces. And these squares can actually, with Saturn, allow you to focus a little bit more, especially on professional tasks. But the squares to Neptune that follow are a little bit more unclear, uncertain, and slightly deceptive or misleading. So will definitely be a time where, first of all, June 12th, Mercury square Saturn, that would be an example of a transit where you can be a little bit more methodical and considerate in your interpretation of information, events, conversations. So if you want to get a lot done this week, if you want to pick a productive day, really apply to anything that requires a certain amount of discernment or discipline, I would pick June 12th. Communication becomes more serious in general. So having professional conversations would be effective. But there is the possibility of some communication breaks or shutdowns. Sometimes when Mercury squares Saturn, people like to really close off contact with someone else. So, if you need like a day or two off from speaking to a sibling or a family member or a coworker, June 12th, it's perfectly natural. But just 2 days later, we do get the Mercury Cazimi, which is an alignment of Mercury and the Sun. Mercury being Hermes, the translator, the communicator, speeding around the sun very quickly. And, during a Mercury Cazimi, really the alignment with the sun is sort of shining a light on and illuminating our mental faculties. And this is an especially strong Cazimi, just given that Mercury is in its ruling sign of Gemini, one of its ruling signs. And so I think that the June sort of 14th time frame, that is where you may get some kind of epiphany coming through, some kind of downloads, some type of really sharp awareness of a solution that you're arriving at. So if you have like a really thorny problem you're trying to solve right now, just expect June 14th to bring in some of that clarity. And of course, Mercury is direct right now, so this is the superior conjunction where Mercury is on the opposite side of the Sun from Earth, and Mercury is eventually, after that Cazimi, it's going to switch to being an evening star. So as Mercury shifts to being an evening star, I think, really we become even more considerate about our decisions, our conversations. It's a more mature Mercury placement. And so, yeah, June 14th is looking very productive. But then once we get into June 16th, and I know there's a lot of shifts, but, that's just how astrology works. It's very much we're in the trenches of the day-to-day here. June 16th, Venus and Mercury are really starting to square Neptune. And Neptune is in a superior position there, meaning it's 3 signs behind Gemini, forming the superior square. So that Neptune square is a time where, as confusing as this sounds, you may get you may arrive at a solution June 14th, and then June 16th, you're suddenly maybe second guessing, or you're getting information that muddies some of your decision making, or someone tries to dissuade you from something. You have to question the sort of inputs you're bringing in on June 16th. Like, are these people really, do they have your best interests in mind? Are they as equipped to make a decision as you? I would be very careful with the advice that you take on June 16th. But June 16th with the square to Neptune does really allow for really vivid, imaginative works to come through. So if you want to like create something artistic, even if you're working in any kind of visual mediums, Neptune is going to give you a lot of material to work through. But yeah, so in general, the week ahead with the Gemini Pisces square, to me, it's really about leveraging that Cazimi on June 14th and not being too beholden to other people's advice towards the end of the week. And also really being discerning about the media inputs that you're taking in. There's going to be a lot of information, a lot of stories out there. With Gemini just being really the pace of the news cycle, increasingly, accelerating with all the Gemini placements, but the square to Neptune, some of the stories that are coming through, you may want to take a second look at that. There may be a story where, just the headline is very deceptive. And so, yeah, but otherwise, I think that the week is looking like it just carries on some of that positivity. Now, in some ways, though, I'm saving the dominant transit for last. We also do have Mars squaring Pluto really throughout the week, especially June 9th. But really June 9th through the following Sunday, there is Mars squaring Pluto, and this is an intense one because it's happening just as Mars goes into Taurus. So Mars and Taurus square Pluto in Aquarius. This can be about those in the collective fighting for the underdog or fighting for a cause that they really care about. But also, this can speak to intense power battles. So tests of like will and might, and people going up against one another to get the upper hand. So we may see some high profile cases in the media of, either like financial crimes being exposed or, litigation around money laundering. There could even be some degree of suspicious activity in the political sphere, maybe some controversy around political donations. And also another, just on a personal level, it's like you don't really want to press too hard against people who are maybe just not seeing eye to eye with you, because Mars square Pluto is very stubborn. There's really no give. So it's like if you're pushing back, someone's pushing back harder. So it's not to say that you should avoid any type of, communication with others, but with Mars square Pluto, you just don't want to double down on a position where there's no resolution. So maintain somewhat of a just, composure during this time. But the other piece I want to mention here is that, the Mars in Taurus placement out upon the ingress, like right when it hits 0 Taurus, that's on Joe Biden's moon. Joe Biden's moon is at 0 Taurus, and his 6th house as a Sag rising. And the last time that Mars was in Taurus was July 2022, and that's when Joe Biden was formally diagnosed with COVID. And, when Mars goes back into his 6th house, you have to wonder if this is a recurrence of some type of theme like that, because the 6th house deals with health, and Mars is the lesser malefic. Mars in the 6th can certainly disrupt certain, just like something related to health. And Pluto is at 1 degree of Aquarius, essentially, pretty close to an exact square with his moon. And actually on June 9th, the moon itself, the transiting moon, will be in Leo. And, of course, at some point during that day, it will pass through. It'll pass across Joe Biden's Pluto, which is a generational placement, yes, but the activation of Mars on his moon, the combination of these stellar influences, makes me wonder if, again, there is some sort of health announcement sort of tied to Joe Biden there. So that's the week ahead. And now I want to transition to the main topic of today's podcast. So, like I said at the beginning, this podcast is not just going to track current events. We're obviously going to look at what's happening across the globe in many episodes and give you strategic advice on the transits, but also, I want to provide a little bit more education around astrology and the different components of it. And whether you're coming into this podcast with a really firm understanding of astrology, or you're just getting into it now, or you're somewhere in the middle, my goal is to talk about these things in a way that's still, it's still intriguing for anyone at any level and informative and, relatable. So today, this is going to be an extension of a video series that I created on TikTok a couple of years ago, which was the concept of evolved versus unevolved versions of each zodiac sign. So when we talk about zodiac signs and you see these superlatives on social media of like the most, the smartest zodiac sign or the most psychic zodiac sign, a lot of those videos are, of course, for entertainment value. But they seem to imply sometimes that there is like, the best or the worst zodiac sign, but there really isn't, of course. Like, as astrologers online, it's like we like to kind of sometimes have fun, of course, with the meaning behind the signs and behind astrology. But today I wanted to talk about sort of the core competency of each sign and the evolutionary journey behind them. So the beauty of this exercise is that, we have to know that each sign is neutral. There is no good or bad sign inherently, but the signs have higher and lower expressions. So you could meet an unevolved Aries, for example, who is incredibly rash and, impulsive and impossible to get along with. You could also meet a really evolved Aries who is capable of like leading a team, leading a group, and, is really driven. So I'm going to walk through each of the signs going from Aries to Pisces. So each sign is going to have these different stages or phases of development. And I want you, as we go through the podcast, to check your birth charts, which you can get on a number of free websites, and track, especially where you have your sun and your moon and your rising sign, but even your Mercury, your Venus, your Mars, some of these personal planets. And, as I go through the traits, and what I've observed in terms of, again, the sort of evolved and unevolved versions, just see and reflect on, how have I seen this show up in myself, in my relationships with people I know in these signs. And, I think it's, again, just a really, it's kind of a fun exercise, and it just gives a little bit more clarity on, the sort of like transmutation ability in astrology, the ability to really take the sort of baseline or foundational concepts of a sign and really improve upon them, because you have free will to do that. Like you can, of course, really take that on and say, okay, this is the shadow side of a sign, and now let me like more consciously incorporate, again, a sort of more exalted, evolved version. Let me harness that in my own life. So let's go through each one, and again, I'm going to start with Aries and then go forward. But before I do that, just a reminder, I go into a number of educational concepts and upcoming transits through my newsletter. So take a moment to subscribe to my Substack when you're done with this episode, or later on. I would really appreciate that. Being able to have a newsletter for me is like, allows me to create like really, really intentional content in addition to this podcast, and, consider taking my classes and get a one-on-one reading with me. This can all be done through evannathanielgrim.com, and that includes the links to my socials. So let's start off with Aries. So Aries is a cardinal fire sign, first sign of the zodiac. And as the first sign, there is naturally going to be this sort of daring and bold quality to Aries. Aries is ruled by the planet Mars, which is the lesser malefic in astrology. When you hear a word like malefic, you're probably like, that doesn't sound very promising or very good. Mars does have some sort of, daunting associations in astrology because, well, number one, it is the red planet. It's the god of war. So there's a quarrelsome attitude to Mars. It's very impulsive. And even if you think about the sort of construction of the aspects and the thema mundi, which is a concept in Hellenistic astrology, Mars has associations with the square aspect, which is a very tense angle and aspect in astrology. And just to pause there, if the concept of an aspect is not familiar to you, we will cover that in a future episode. But the Mars energy in Aries, because Mars also rules Scorpio, but in the masculine sign of Aries, and I mean masculine in an archetypal sense, but that fiery version of Mars, that masculine yang version of Mars, is very much playing offense. It can be aggressive. It decisively pursues and goes after things, but sometimes it also creates strife and conflict and discord, and it can kind of sever ties to things. Like it can break a it can break down a diplomatic situation and create that sort of again, that discord. So when we think about Aries, Aries definitely can, in an unevolved version of Aries, we have a concept of almost like a headless energy where it's just like barreling forward with really no agenda other than the exercise of its own willpower and the assertion of its own autonomy. So if you have a lot of Aries in your chart or you work around a lot of Aries people, you may notice that they will often sort of take their version of the truth as given, or they will prioritize their opinion over everyone else's, and they may not always be the greatest listeners. But, as signs evolve, the way that they evolve, and I'm going to explain this through the lens of each sign, they're actually taking the energy of the opposite sign. So in astrology, we have 12 zodiac signs, which are 30-degree partitions of the 360-degree sky. And, within each of these 12, across these 12 signs, we actually have 6 axes or opposites. So, of course, there are 12 signs and iterations, of basically self-development and actualization and release. Like the 12 zodiac signs really map out a hero's journey of sorts. Each sign is going to have an opposite within the same polarity. So a masculine sign opposes a masculine sign. Feminine opposes feminine. And the feminine elements are, the feminine elements are earth and water. The masculine elements are fire and air. So, you'll always get a fire sign opposing an air sign, an earth sign opposing a water sign. And in the case, and when you have these opposites, you have one sign more or less operating as like a personal sign, which speaks very much to the energy of the self. And then the opposite sign is either an interpersonal sign or a transpersonal sign, meaning it has some degree of involvement in the public sphere or with the collective. So, for example, Aries is the self, and Libra is very much about the other and the relationships that you have. So, in a natural state for Aries, the core competencies would be, leadership, decisiveness, strength, courage. But the sort of unrefined version of an Aries would take this sort of, lone wolf approach to everything. And they would maybe try to either take control of the situation or, just sort of end up on their own island where it's like impossible to collaborate with them. It's impossible to accomplish any kind of, there's no teamwork attitude there. So Aries can kind of create a lot of wreckage through their own impulses. But if they are borrowing from the Libra side of the axis, they borrow from the opposite sign there, the cardinal air sign, which is balancing the scales, then they can learn how to be a little bit more diplomatic, to be more considerate, to learn how to trust others. But they're not losing their Aries spice. I mean, they're still demonstrating really how to take ownership of a situation, to lead, but they're doing so in a way where they are listening, helping, asking that other person what they think about their opinion, what they think about the decision. And that's how an Aries can drive optimal outcomes that benefit everybody, but they don't lose that sense of self. They don't lose that sense of you know, they have that sort of almost executive acumen, like any cardinal sign. But the way that they exude that leadership, it's almost inspiring to others because they are a fire sign. So fire signs ideally are taking risks. So Aries could be the risk taker who decides to run their own business and become an entrepreneur. So I think that that's how Aries evolves, is by learning the art of compromise, and that there can be these win-win scenarios. So next up we have Taurus, and this is a fixed earth sign, and it's a continuation of this hero's journey. So Aries is literally just the bursting of the self onto the scene and saying, hey, I'm here, I'm an individual, and with my own will. And then Taurus is more about the survival needs, the accumulation of resources, whether that's money, possessions, the experience of the natural world, very much about, again, like tapping into these survival instincts. And Tauruses have a fascination and an enjoyment with things that are very conspicuous and obvious and apparent, like in their reality. So Tauruses enjoy anything that they can interact with the five senses. So, nice music playing in the background while they're eating at a nice restaurant or putting their bare feet on the earth. Taurus can kind of really ground themselves in whatever they value. And that's up to you as a Taurus. Like, it doesn't have to be money. It could be anything that you care about. And Tauruses are really grounded in those values. And again, I think they just embrace the simple things in life that bring contentment. So you could make a strong argument that Taurus being ruled by Venus, it is, again, not in the spirit of like superlatives. It's like, yeah, maybe they are in some ways one of the happier signs. But one aspect of Taurus that can show there's sort of an unevolved nature to it is, that they hold on to their notion of reality too rigidly, or sometimes they sort of hang back and more passively enjoy the sort of that natural world, and they may lose an urgency to really explore either the extrasensory realms or some of the deeper layers to life. And it very much depends on what planet, with any of these signs, it depends on what planet you have in a sign, what house it's in, what aspects those planets are making. But if we're just talking today about the archetypal nature of each sign, the Taurus energy and Tauruses can sort of have this sense of, again, there's an immovability, and there's a bit of I don't know if I would call it a stagnation per se, but there's a feeling of like really, really planting firm roots and not wanting to deviate from a sort of lifestyle. And another way in which a Taurus can be unevolved is actually if they don't have a firm grasp of their values. So a Taurus may lack consistency if they don't have that, or they're holding on to values that are, very damaging or destructive to them. So, Taurus could value activities or lifestyles that are detrimental to them. So for a Taurus, a lot of this is predicated upon the values that they uphold. And for a Taurus to evolve, though, like I said, with Aries drawing from Libra, Taurus has to draw from the sign of Scorpio, which is opposite. And that's the fixed water sign. So for a Taurus, I think a Taurus needs to dig in to their shadow side and to the shadow sides of life, and to really, arrive at a more complete understanding of like what's around them through doing that. So it doesn't always have to be like the subconscious, but I think for a Taurus, it's like they want to adopt some of those scorpionic traits of being like kind of deep and penetrating in how they think about things or attack a problem, and also accessing those sort of watery emotions and the intuition, so that they're kind of blending these together, and even borrowing some of the transformational qualities of Scorpio, and by investigating these sort of like hidden forces of life, they can even sort of arrive at maybe even more authentic values, or still like find the stability in life, but with a sense of what is in the recesses of the mind or what is down below. And, there's that classic analogy of like Scorpio is the soil and the roots, and Taurus is the actual plant that you can see above ground. But Taurus and Scorpio are sister signs, so they have that oppositional connection. So for a Taurus, again, to evolve, I think that they need to have that sort of investigative approach to life in some ways. So, so that they are aware of what goes beyond those five senses. But by kind of facing those darker, shadowy, even like more fearful aspects of life, they can be truly stable, having gone through that. And they can be a source of stability for other people who come to them and say, I just had this really dark experience. And the Taurus can be like, I had the dark night of the soul too, but I'm still here. And like, let's enjoy a nice lemon from the lemon tree. Like Tauruses are still being Tauruses. Like they're still able to provide that sense of centeredness and groundedness. But it's almost more genuine if they've really gone through and dug into, again, those sort of subterranean aspects of life. So the next sign in our sequence naturally would be Gemini. This is the third sign of the zodiac, and so now we're going away from just the pure survival needs or the enjoyment of Mother Nature, and we're developing the mind, the mental faculties. So Gemini has a playful curiosity, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury, Hermes, is able to thread this needle between dualities. Literally, Mercury can be a morning star or an evening star. Mercury has that sort of that sort of trickster archetype to it, but it also has the agility to, explore concepts from different angles and faces. So, what like the core competency for Gemini is that they are appreciating ambiguity, they're open-minded, and they can reconcile different opposing thoughts, or they can hold two opposing thoughts in their mind at the same time. And, Geminis are very clever and great at improvisation. They can be very funny and witty. They're very quick-minded, and they're able to solve problems very quickly. And the thing with Geminis is that because they can do that dance where they're looking at positions from different sides, they can also adopt that trickster attitude, where they're contradicting themselves internally, and then they're they're saying contradictory things to the same person in the same day, and it's like, well, who are you really? So while Geminis can be really funny, again, like they can adopt some kind of impersonation, they also really trip over themselves, and they can also get this sort of analysis paralysis where it's like they just don't really know how to make a decision because there's so much coming in. Sometimes in an unevolved state, Geminis can, they can be duplicitous, and they can also lack attention to things. Like there's an attention deficit there at times, which I think is natural to their competency of like, again, very freely jumping between different thoughts. But in terms of like how they move through life, they do have to be mindful of like, they have to find mechanisms for focus, right? For learning how to focus. But, the ability to embrace those concepts, I think, is still obviously very, very powerful. But being an air sign and not a fire sign, which is where the opposite sign lives, is in a fire sign, which is Sagittarius, they have to borrow a little bit from Sagittarius, because if a Gemini is just like learning about things to learn about things, and they're not really thinking about like the why part of the equation, there is sort of like a pointlessness to some of these exercises. Like, learning just for the fun of it, I mean, that's fine. But I think for a Gemini to really evolve, they need to borrow from Sagittarius, which is all about the higher mind and thinking more big picture, and getting into adopting some kind of overarching like philosophy and view of the world. Like, why am I trying to learn about these things, and what is my message to people? Because sometimes Gemini can get a little bit too caught up in just like the empirical, factual realm of like the how and the what. And while that objectivity is important, they also need, I think, to have that sort of overarching purpose, because I think for Sagittarius, that can include like, like not only a philosophy, but like an ethical position on something. And so, also that can be very inspiring for the Gemini. So being able to have that clear sense of purpose, it can help them direct some of their learning journey in a certain area, and it can help them convey a message in a way that's more compelling to other people. Because again, otherwise, the Gemini will just kind of drone on and just like put on different accents and impersonations, and it's like really funny and it's really funny, but then eventually it gets exhausting. So I think for Geminis, kind of have some kind of arc of directionality in terms of what you're doing, but of course still adopt that sort of like playful, inquisitive curiosity. So next we have Cancer, the cardinal water sign. And Cancer here is concerned with really building that foundation and that comfort zone. And that can include, having a nice home or having a home that you're comfortable with, and also being able to play a nurturing role with people, taking care of them and taking care of yourself. Cancer is ruled by the moon, so of course there's an emotional expression to Cancer. There's a sensitivity to Cancer, feeling emotions at such a personal level, and because of that, though, they can really evoke emotions in others, and they can understand what someone's going through and help them feel comfortable through a difficult time, or some other scenario like that. So, by being deeply in touch with their own emotions, I think they're very gifted at nurturing. But sometimes Cancers do adopt a more sort of insular attitude where they kind of like hold themselves away, they nest, and they even adopt like a scarcity mindset where they worry about not having enough of something. So, not having enough of a safety net, whether that's financially or in terms of like, I always give this example of like making sure there's enough gas in the car when they're still have a, half full tank, or sort of squabbling over pennies when they don't have to. Cancers can definitely, I guess the word would be like kind of miserly. They can be kind of miserly if they fixate too much on building, if they become too obsessed with building that foundation. So now they have to borrow from the opposite sign a little bit. So borrowing from Capricorn, not the fixed, but Capricorn being the cardinal earth sign. Capricorn is also trying to build a foundation, but it's doing so in a way where, whereas Capricorn is like the warm shower that you're comfortable in, Capricorn is like leaving that shower and going to work. Cancer is that feeling of like a warm blanket. Capricorn is getting out of bed. And so with Cancers, they want to be, they want to get more and more comfortable with like leaving that nest, leaving that safety net, whatever that safety net is for you as a Cancer, and feeling comfortable persisting through a little bit harsher conditions and having a clear sense of like, drive towards like long-term goals. And yet, by doing that, I think that it adds even more value to that foundation you have at home by going out there into the public sphere, whether that's for work or something else. Cancer and Capricorn are the mother father archetypes. So, as a Cancer, you're always going to thrive, and part of your core competency is the ability to comfort others. And you can do that through literally your career directly, if you're like in healthcare or something, or you're teaching, or you're providing for people. But it can also even be through like your creativity, like maybe you're making people feel nurtured through like a nice poem that you wrote or a song that you wrote or something. But it's like you have to recognize, like, once you've built that solid foundation, venture outside, accomplish those goals, and again, but don't ever withhold fully your emotional sensitivity. Feel comfortable with that. Maybe even factor that in again to your career. So as a Cancer, you're really getting more comfortable being sort of at that top level, like, and being visible and being in some kind of like, maybe not public eye, but just being, in a vocation that you feel strongly about. Um, yeah, so I think it's really beautiful to be able to play that nurturing role in sort of a um, broader environment. So now we have Leo, the fixed fire sign. So Leo is taking sort of that insularity of Cancer and venturing outward. So Cancer is that home base, and then Leo is kind of like when you're a kid and you go to recess and you're just playing outside, or even if you're just leaving the home and going around and like skateboarding with the neighbors or something as a child. Leos are the charismatic creative sign. And as the second fire sign, they're taking a risk to creatively express who they are with a confidence. And it's a confidence that is infectious, and it really, the people around them oftentimes appreciate that. And they sometimes reflect that. And they're like, oh, I want to feel like I'm sort of unimpeded with my creativity. And so Leos can be on the stage, or they can be playing music, or they can just be even like working with or teaching children and nurturing their inner child. So they have this joy of life, this vivaciousness, but being ruled by the sun sits at the center of the solar system. As a Leo, you can sometimes suffocate the energy around you by putting yourself at the center of that solar system and expecting other people to orbit around you. So for Leos, it's all about the management of your egoic expression and not allowing the ego to overwhelm you. So while your original motivation can be to be that sort of playful, eternal, youthful person, you may have an over attachment to your results of everything that you do. So feeling like, I have to get X number of people at the show at all costs, and I have to be almost ridiculous or exaggerated just to get that attention, or I have to have this many followers on social media, or I have to get everybody at the party to like me, or I have to get everybody to laugh at some point. Maybe they're borrowing a little bit of Gemini there. But Leos, again, can get carried away with their ego, and they're kind of blind to it because the sun's rays are literally just like, you know, emanating from them. So they're not able to see like, wow, people don't necessarily need to hear any more of me at this party. Like maybe it's time to like cede the floor to someone else. So Leos need to borrow from Aquarius, the fixed air sign on the opposite side. So the best analogy to use for this is like Leo is the sort of the king, queen, royalty, and their cup is already full. Like they have already been given the attention or the accolades that they want. But Aquarius is the water bearer, and Aquarius is distributing the water and the knowledge to the collective, and it's helping people. Leos really need to merge their egoic life force with the conscientiousness of what a group or a collective or what humanity needs, so that they can be either a charismatic leader or a creative, sort of joyful, inspiring person, but someone who is lifting up the spirits of that group or that audience and getting their hearts to beat faster and rekindling their own joy of life. That's what the evolved Leo looks like. And it's almost like Leos, they're returning to their core identity, which is to be that playful child, and they're allowing their activities that they do to emanate from their heart space. And so by doing what they love, they inspire the crowd to pursue their own dreams. And so let's move on to Virgo. Virgo is the sixth sign. It's a mutable earth sign, the second sign ruled by Mercury. So Gemini is the more playful, sort of trickster archetype of Mercury. Virgo is more so distilling all of the sort of, I don't want to call it chaos, but some of the random knowledge that Geminis are kind of incorporating into their minds and refining it down and purifying it, perfecting it into a specific craft or specialty. So Virgos are amazing practitioners. They are craftspeople. They like to be useful. They like to be relied upon. And the last thing a Virgo ever wants to say to someone is, I don't know how to do that. Virgos want to be in a position where they can constantly say, I know how to do that. I can help you. So, for example, like having a niche position at a company that is working in a completely different competency. So if you work for, let's say, a financial firm, but you're a graphic designer, everybody at the firm who ever needs graphic design help is going to come to you. So as a Virgo, it's like you appreciate being asked to help and be of service to others and provide that sort of skill that is indispensable to that team. And Virgo is also, aiming for perfection through, this very clear, regimented daily routine that kind of again, it's like repeating a process or a methodology, and they're consistently improving the algorithm upstairs, and they're continually refining their craft. So again, you're striving to become an expert, practitioner, and you're committing to consistent daily routines, and you have these niche skills. But in that pursuit of perfection, purification, you may have you may have a fear of imperfection, and a perfectionist tendency where it's like you're missing the forest for the trees. And that perfectionism can actually prevent you from ever helping others. So let's go back to the graphic design example. It's like maybe you are a brilliant graphic designer, but you are afraid of like maybe not meeting the expectations. So you'd rather not scale up that project in the first place. So for a Virgo to evolve, they need to draw from Pisces, the mutable water sign. And so one aspect I would also mention for Virgo is like that unevolved version of a Virgo can be very neurotic also, and just in the weeds, very particular and obsessive. And I've seen examples of Virgos being actually kind of antagonistic, where it's like if someone on the team or someone they're cohabitating with like doesn't fulfill the exact requirements that they have for them, like they can really be very biting, and that can actually erode the quality of relationships. Like think about the fact that Venus is actually fallen in Virgo. It's in a fallen position there. So let's take from Pisces, where Venus is exalted, and think about for Virgo, okay, not just how am I trying to help people through a practical skill set, but how am I really tapping into a higher purpose, even a divine purpose, or feeling connected to the collective, feeling a sense of unity. So Pisces is maybe serving a higher power, but also experiencing solidarity with everyone around them and intuitively feeling compassionately what other people are going through, and applying a bit, I think, of a softer touch. So for a Virgo, remind yourself what calls to you, remind yourself what your vocation is and like what you want to do, but make sure that you're doing it from a compassionate perspective. And I even think that broader sense of purpose is going to, similar to Gemini, it's going to help drive you to get out of that Mercury, that cerebral mercurial style, and getting into the Jupiter signs, because Sagittarius and Pisces are both ruled by Jupiter. So that's getting you into a more exalted almost, or maybe exalted is the wrong word to use in this context, but sort of a higher state of being, and feeling like you are tapping into a larger sense of purpose and a higher mind, and you're seeing, even with a Pisces energy, like sort of a beauty in all things. And I think even when Virgos are drawing from Pisces, they're healing themselves by letting go. Pisces has a letting go energy, so it's like maybe I'm letting go of the perfectionism, maybe I'm letting go of the mistake I made, and that's the route to evolution for a Virgo. So advancing forward, we have Libra, the cardinal air sign. And, for this section, now we've already kind of addressed all 12 signs by talking about their opposites. So what's going to be interesting is now we're going to flip the script here. So I've talked about Aries earlier and how they need to draw from Libra. Now, again, the tables have turned. Libras are the masters of compromise. They understand the art of compromise, diplomacy, and they seek balance through a number of means, through one-on-one relationships, through aesthetics, interior design, art, or even like diplomacy, politics, and justice, pursuing justice as maybe a lawyer or something. But like Libras are really thriving as like consultants, mentors, advisors, because they know how to build trust, and they look for win-win situations where everyone benefits. They look for mutual exchange and trade. And, again, they're very diplomatic. But it's like sometimes they have a desire to placate others, pacify others. And that desire overrides the pursuit of like truth and honesty and, even the ability to assert their own needs. So that can allow unhealthy relationships to persist, and that creates an imbalance, and that creates a lot of torment inside for them. So Libras need to channel their inner Aries and set boundaries, assert themselves, be autonomous, cherish their sovereignty, and have self-respect. Libras, they need to show respect for themselves so that they don't allow someone, for example, to walk all over them. Um they don't like allow bad behavior to continue for the sake of having a peaceful conversation. So the only way to drive at a really solid solution is to point out, you know, where there are drawbacks, downsides, where there are faults, and even like what someone else is saying or doing. And it's like if you demonstrate self-respect, like the other person's going to respect you more. So as a Libra, it's like you want to make sure that you have a really strong sense of like backbone, and you're not wasting anyone's time by bypassing sort of a more difficult head-on conversation. So it's like your transparency, your higher transparency can lead to, again, healthier but less codependent relationships also. So let's go on to Scorpio, the fixed water sign. So again, you should be familiar with Scorpio if you've been listening to the episodes so far, just through the lens of Taurus. So whereas Tauruses have to go deeper into the subterranean realms to truly understand, what stability looks like, in my opinion, to truly understand what that stability looks like. Scorpios, and I am a Scorpio, which is why I'm laughing. Scorpios almost need to get out of their own turbulent waters and appreciate life from a sense of contentment, and find their own groundedness. So Scorpio has that deep, mysterious quality. They are very perceptive. We are absolutely tapped into some kind of extrasensory realm, and we really drive to the heart of something, and we like to keep digging and digging until we kind of pull out some kind of kernel of truth, which is very harsh sometimes and unvarnished. And I think that's what Scorpio is really good at, is ripping the mask off something and seeing the unvarnished truth for what it is, and exploring the shadows and the corners of life. But a lot of times what we see with Scorpios is that they become obsessed with getting the upper hand also, because what happens is, in my experience with like doing readings for Scorpios and just like thinking about like prominent Scorpios in the world, it's like a lot of Scorpios have reasons to not trust people from their early life, or they have reasons not, like there was a time maybe when safety was compromised. And so Scorpios naturally develop psychic abilities. And by psychic, I mean not that they're talking to spirits. Not like every Scorpio is a medium. That's a medium. Mediumship is a different thing. Scorpios are, I think, all psychic in some way, because it was a survival mechanism growing up. Like there was usually someone in their life who was a little bit maybe manipulative or untrustworthy or secretive and concealed they were concealing something. So Scorpios have to read between the lines naturally to understand what's coming next, to anticipate situations. But because of that, they can feel a lack of control inside. And so what happens is they may try to control the dynamics of a situation or what someone else does. So kind of like Virgo, there can be a little bit of a neurotic sense about them. So they also hold on to bitterness and resentment in addition to trying to control a situation. So even if you're a Scorpio that's more chill or something like that, you may be harboring some degree of bitterness and anger and anguish without even realizing it, because some of the memories are repressed, by the way. Some of the trauma is repressed. But Scorpios need to go on an investigation of these core experiences that led to these attitudes, in order to kind of uproot them and catalyze a transformation, ideally. So to say, like the classic example I always give is like if you're a Scorpio and it's like you check the door 3 times at night that it's locked. It's like, why are you obsessively checking that the door is locked? Scorpio will tell you, well, because I want to feel safe. The next question is, why don't you feel safe? That's the $1 million question for some Scorpios that they actually go through entire lifetimes trying to find the answer to. Maybe it's through hypnotherapy or something else. Other Scorpios know what it is, but it's difficult to face. But by facing these core experiences, they do catalyze a transformation. And then they feel like they have more control. And this is where they're drawing from Taurus, by the way. Scorpio can draw from Taurus's sense of stability by over time, when they do the self work and the self investigation, they learn to appreciate what's in front of them, which is a form to me of like being more present. Because sometimes the Scorpio is kind of drowning in their own anguish, their own turbulence. But that cycle of suffering continues if they can't identify and maybe like where that's coming from, originating from, and kind of reconfigure it. But to truly tap into the Taurus energy, also on the other side of that, to say, this is life, this is nature, this is, there is a richness to what can actually be observed, and I can trust what I'm seeing, and I don't always have to psychoanalyze the situation. So by actually enjoying what's in front of us, we actually have more bandwidth to deploy these psychic gifts when they're needed. And actually, Scorpios become healers. They're using they're using their psychic gifts to help those in need. And again, doing so though from a very stable place. And I think that really evolved Scorpios learn to appreciate that richness of the natural world and to be content with what they have. So now we have Sagittarius, the mutable fire sign. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Sagittarius's mission is to really explore the outside world, and as a fire sign, taking a risk to explore what's out there, to open their mind, to be very open-minded and tolerant. Because for a lot of people, if they have a bit more of a closed-off attitude, they're more risk-averse. It's like maybe they don't want to explore what's out there. For some people, that's a terrifying thought. For Sagittarius, it's like, bring it on. I want to see all that life has to offer. So Sagittarius, again, being ruled by the gas giant Jupiter, is seeking more abundance, and it's taking a wider view of things and seeing all the options of where they could go with life. And they're really trying to get a wider perspective through things like travel, exploration, and education. And those experiences are shaping their broader view of life. And when they return from these experiences, they can be incredibly compelling and persuasive speakers, teachers, philosophers, marketers, advertisers. But where Sagittarius can kind of express itself as an unevolved version is if they become too self-righteous. And they're lording their beliefs over everybody. They have excessive pride in the sense that their convictions are becoming too dogmatic. So this is actually where Sagittarius needs to draw from Gemini, the opposite sign, and ground itself in facts. Gemini is the how and what. Sagittarius is the why. So whereas Sagittarius can drone on and on about, these grand philosophies that are very abstract and nebulous, it's like sometimes they get too obsessed with that belief system, and it's like they believe that they're right because they're the one believing it, or because, they just feel like there's a passion for it. The unevolved version of a Sagittarius, though, would be if they really succumb to self-righteousness and they're lording their beliefs over everyone and their convictions are becoming way too dogmatic. Because if Sagittariuses are sort of immersing themselves too much in their belief systems, they can feel as if they are right or correct just by virtue of their passion for something, and they're not really backing it up with like facts or information. So this is where they're drawing from Gemini, where there's like a clear ability to tap into the Mercury energy of discerning fact from fiction and not just trying to sell a storyline or a narrative, but again, backing it up. And so Sagittariuses actually need a little bit of that sort of cerebral practicality so they don't get carried away. I think about with Jupiter, it's almost like they're just taking flight, but there's no, they're just continuing to fly way beyond where they need to be. And they're just like, they've lost their audience, or they've lost the perspective. They've lost the truth, ironically. So, they need to kind of, again, really have a holistic sense of like why they believe what they believe, how they lead to those conclusions. And, even just like maintaining an openness to like other perspectives. And it's not really that difficult for them to do that, given that they are a mutable sign and that's how they develop the beliefs in the first place. But as long as they're exploring the specific facts behind their ideas, and they're still really leaning into that conviction. I think Sagittarius can be very likable to people, very inspiring. So now we'll move on to Capricorn, the cardinal Earth sign, and ruled by Saturn. So we're getting a lot more serious. Sagittarius, the sign before it, exploring things with a bit of a sort of open-mindedness and curiosity about the world. Capricorn is very methodical, and they have a gift for working diligently, incrementally towards these long-term objectives. And Capricorn is the sea goat climbing to the top of the mountain. They're willing to do what it takes to work consistently and persist through really tough conditions to get to that peak and achieve that peak experience and to be recognized and respected in the world around them. And so they have a bit more of a stoicism about them. And it's like that stoicism and that delaying of gratification is what allows them to get to that long-term goal. So like a Capricorn would be like the person who decides not to drink that night so they can get a better grade on the exam. And by getting that better grade, maybe they get into the graduate program they want, and then that leads to the right job. So Capricorns are always looking into the consequences of their actions. And at the same time, though, this attitude of stoicism and delayed gratification, sometimes they do suppress their emotions completely. So a lot of times the way that a Capricorn may solve emotional problems is by working more, going back to the office, working 12-hour days. And that's almost like a way for them to, they're distracting themselves kind of from like more difficult, abstract emotions that don't have a clear structure to them. They don't have a clear, like they can't tackle some of those problems as easily. So they kind of stray away sometimes from their emotions and just work on their goals to evade those difficult feelings. So Capricorn needs to draw from Cancer, the opposite sign, and fully process, fully let the emotions flow through them and add a bit more of a soft touch, because by understanding their emotions, they're not just someone who's clocking in and out of a job and then feeling very isolated and walled off from everyone else in their life. They're able to be like, let's say, that nurturing parent, or they're able to, sit with someone who's going through an emotional, sort of breakdown and just say like, hey, like, and not feel like they have to come up with a solution for them, like that they can just like hear them out and like, hold space for them. So, also as a Capricorn, sometimes the unevolved Capricorn will strive for success not on their own terms, but because they want to be accepted by society. So like seeking status or something, or prestige, because sometimes Capricorns are very self-conscious, being ruled by Saturn. So as a Capricorn, you also want to think about what are your internal, external motivations for things, for accomplishing things. Are you doing it? And this is the analogy I give a lot of times to my clients who have a lot of Capricorn placements. It's like, you can climb to the top, but are you going to enjoy the view? That depends on if you're walking your own path or not. So if you're walking your father or your mother's path or whatever they set out for you, by the time you get to the top, you get that medical degree, you're like, well, I didn't really want to go to medical school. So make sure that you're intrinsically motivated as well to be evolved. But I think that part of that comes from the Cancer side of the equation, drawing from your own internal emotions, being aware of where you stand, not just practically, but emotionally. I think that would again, give you a sense of you still have that strong work ethic, but you're working towards something that actually makes you feel fulfilled, good, comfortable inside. So now we're getting into Aquarius, the 11th sign, the fixed air sign. Aquarius is also ruled by Saturn and Uranus in modern astrology. Aquariuses are very much looking to develop a sense of responsibility through groups and group activities, typically organizations or communities. And they usually see organizations and communities as a vehicle for progress, and that's how they drive progress in the collective. And sometimes they seek progress through working in technology or an innovative field, or they pursue novel ideas and novelty. And even sometimes Aquariuses will get into politics, but Aquarius is the water bearer. So they're really just trying to help people, provide wisdom and knowledge that's going to move humanity forward, or they're looking into the future. But Aquarius, being ruled by Saturn and being an air sign, it can have a very detached attitude, because they kind of have to be a little detached in order to thrive in these groups. And when I think about an Aquarius, I oftentimes think about like a flight attendant. Flight attendant every day has to interface with so many passengers. A lot of the passengers are, nervous flyers, or they're going through a lot of emotions, and the flight attendant has to be kind of detached in order to kind of quickly tend to their needs and then move on and not be affected by it. So an Aquarius would be that. I think that's a great example of like the Aquarius archetype. But sometimes the Aquarius will be detached, where they think about, they have a bit of a utilitarian ideal sometimes, where they're like, what do we need to accomplish as a society in order to generate the best possible outcome for the best number of people, even if that means, doing something that is not good for everybody. Like Aquarius can kind of think in terms of like bird's eye view numbers and how people are affected at a collective scale. And so when you're thinking about that macro scale, I remember I jokingly made a video once about the Aquarius Scorpio couple, the Zodiac couple, and calling them the most dangerous Zodiac couple. And like, of course, it was meant, in jest in a lot of ways. But there's a kernel of truth to that. Of like, Aquarius can, be a little bit divorced from, again, the notion of like the individual's needs, and a little bit too obsessed with like the collective outcomes. So now we have to draw from Leo, which is the heart-centered sign. It's the charismatic, joyful, childlike sign that's just wanting to be creative. And it's really like heart-centered as a Leo. Like it's very, yes, sometimes prideful and egoic, or egotistical, but very much also heart-centered. So Aquariuses can feel, while they can feel alienated from the human experience, they need to rekindle that joy within themselves and find their inner center and inner humanness to ensure that they're driving positive change. But also, number one, doing what they love, but also making sure that they, are truly understanding the impact of what they're trying to do in the world. The other thing, though, as an Aquarius, is it's like if you're drawing from the Leo energy, it's like you can also feel the pride of like expressing yourself as an individual and not just being lost in the crowd. Because sometimes Aquariuses are just in the crowd, in the group, in the community, observing the person on stage. But an Aquarius should be able to, sort of shift between these two roles of like being in the crowd or being the one expressing creatively and joyfully. And finally, we have Pisces, the mutable water sign, the last sign in the zodiac, which is, really at the end of one cycle and right before the beginning of a new one, which is sort of has this Aries-like quality of an initiation. So Pisces is about letting go. It's about endings. It's about the liminal space between worlds, the dream world and the real world, again, the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. And so think about Pisces as that balsamic moon phase where you're just like releasing, you're resting, you're letting go. And Pisces is very diffuse and picks up on emotions from the collective. It's ruled by Neptune and Jupiter. Think about Pisces as the oceanic emotions that we surround ourselves with. So Pisces, their core competency is that they're really tuned into the outside realm and, the emotions from outside. They're tuned in. Like when I think about Neptune, I think about that. They have these antennas. They're tuned into these higher frequencies. They're very sensitive to the universal senses in the collective and the emotions that are going on and undulating. But by allowing so much energy in, they can experience overwhelm. They can, experience, they can reflect the emotions of others. So if they're in a group of really depressed or sad people, they can mirror that sadness and the happiness too. But Pisces can have this overstimulation, and they may respond to that by withdrawing from the world or escaping and sort of indulging in escapist tendencies. Too much television, drinking, substances, things like that. And if they allow themselves to live in a dream world too much also, whether they're escaping or they're just imagining things, they can experience overwhelming existential crises, confusion, and they can have a loss of their egoic identity. And they numb themselves from reality at times. So Pisces have to really, find healthy activities and choose transcendence and elevate consciousness. But I also think in the spirit of this entire episode, they do have to pull from Virgo, the opposite sign. So whereas Pisces looks at the universal, Virgo looks at the atomic, the detail, the granular. And as an earth sign, Virgo has a practical kind of vehicle for driving outcomes. So whereas a Pisces can meander and kind of like drift off into that abstract realm, they can harness this inner Virgo in them to adopt more, again, healthy activities and pursuits, to think not just in terms of the spiritual realm, but in terms of like, the body. Virgo is connected to the body a little bit more clearly. And they're able to draw on this divine inspiration, translate it into some kind of practical skill set where they are still serving something, some higher power, but applying it in a more practical way. So just like Sag and Gemini, we have the union of Jupiter and Mercury there, which is, again, being able to shift and straddle these worlds of like incredible discernment with Mercury, but also the higher mind with Jupiter. And then with Neptune, we're getting even more kind of, I think, grandiose in our conceptions of what unity consciousness looks like. And so Pisces can really unify people, but have a plan behind it with the Virgo archetype also incorporated. And, they're engaging with those around them. Ideally, eventually, as a Pisces, you're not numbing yourself and you're really improving the conditions of humanity. So hopefully that gave you a really strong sense today of the qualities of the zodiac signs and how it's really up to the individual to harness a zodiac sign to its fullest potential, or to sort of tread water with that zodiac sign and just use the sort of least developed, most disheveled version of it, and that's where astrology rests in your hands. Astrology exists with or without us in a way because it is natural cycles and the observation of natural cycles, but it's also up to us to utilize these energies in a way where we are either balancing karma by balancing the sign with the opposite sign, and also, really, just really manifesting the life that we want. So again, if you listen to this episode and you're like, I've got an Aries stellium, meaning, 3 or more planets in a sign, bunch of planets in Aries, yeah, I can see why, I can be kind of a strong arm and like nobody wants to work with me. Or as a Taurus, I can see why maybe I am a little bit too content with what I can see and observe, and I need to like investigate the shadows. Or if I'm a Scorpio, yeah, do the shadow work, but maybe I could chill a little bit. So, so again, I really hope that this was helpful for you. And I would appreciate any feedback or comments on this episode, and other things and subtopics within this that you would want to see. I could really see an episode about just each sign, and that will definitely come at some point. But definitely subscribe to the podcast, give it a review. The reviews really help us get it out to more people. And again, feel free to send us any feedback. Be sure to subscribe to my newsletter, my Substack, and seek out a one-on-one reading with me. I do birth chart readings, transit readings, and I will be offering more readings in 2025 as well. And my courses are on my website, evannathanielgrim.com. And I would like to thank you again for tuning into Astrology Unbound, and we'll see you on the next episode.